A quiet realization can change the entire atmosphere of a room, and the realization I want to offer you tonight is simple, yet powerful. You have never breathed alone in this universe. Every inhale you thought belonged only to you has always stirred something far beyond your own chest. And as you sit with me now, I hope you can feel, not through logic, but through a gentle knowing deep in your heart, that you are woven into something far greater than the story of separation you were taught to believe. When people talk about connection, most imagine family bonds, friendships, or the relationships they've carried through decades. But there is a subtler layer, an undercurrent that moves through all of us, a kind of quiet electricity that doesn't shout, but hums softly beneath every conversation, every memory, every choice. I want you to picture it like a thin veil of morning mist, gliding through every soul, every event, every breath, binding us without ever needing to be seen. And from that place, let me invite you into a question that opens the door to an entirely new way of understanding reality. If two photons, tiny particles you can't even see, can change instantly in response to one another, even when separated by billions of light years, then what about us? If matter itself remembers its connection, responds to its counterpart faster than light can travel, then perhaps we've been far too modest about the depth of our own interconnectedness. In the quantum world, there is a phenomenon known as entanglement. Not magic, not mysticism science. When two particles have ever been connected, they never fully separate again. Place one on Earth and send the other to the edge of the universe. A shift in one is mirrored in the other instantly. Einstein himself called it spooky action at a distance, because it challenged every old assumption we had about how reality works. But from the perspective of human experience, it doesn't feel spooky at all. It feels familiar. It feels like something we've always known in our bones. It feels like the scientific confirmation of what our hearts have whispered for centuries. We are not separate beings. We are expressions of one field of consciousness. And when you change, truly change, it does not happen in isolation. It ripples outward, like a soft vibration, like the way calmness from one person can settle an entire room, or how one tense, frightened heartbeat can unsettle everyone around it. You've felt this your whole life, even if no one ever put it into words. Think about the days you feel lighter, more at ease. On those days, your home feels gentler, conversations become softer, meals taste better. Nothing mystical, simply the field responding to the shift inside you. That is quantum entanglement in its simplest, most human form. And maybe, in your own life, you've had moments that seem small but remain impossible to explain with traditional logic. You think of someone, and they call immediately. You feel the heaviness in a loved one's heart long before they speak. You walk into a room and feel, without knowing why, that something is wrong. That's not intuition in the mystical sense. That's resonance. That's your consciousness, picking up changes in the collective field, just like a breeze brushing across the surface of a still lake, creating ripples before a single leaf even touches the water. In this deeper layer of connection, we don't end at the edges of our skin. Your consciousness expands, radiates, touches everything around you. And when your frequency shifts, when you soften, when you breathe, when you release an old burden, the field around you shifts too. Like tuning one instrument in an orchestra, and suddenly the entire ensemble begins to harmonize more easily. I've spoken with many elders, people who have weathered wars, heartbreaks, illnesses, losses unimaginable, and most of them tell me the same thing. All I want now is peace. But what they rarely know is that their peace is not just for them. Their peace becomes a blessing to everyone they encounter. A peaceful person stabilizes the entire emotional climate around them. They become a lighthouse for the people they love, and even for strangers who may never know their name. As you listen tonight, I want you to feel this truth as something intimate, not theoretical, Every piece of healing you bring into yourself moves outward into the world, gently reshaping the people and places you touch. Release one old wound, and the world becomes a little less heavy. Open your heart a little wider, and the world brightens. Forgive yourself, and generations of unspoken pain begin to loosen. You don't accomplish this by forcing anyone to change. You shift the field simply by changing the signal you emit. In the quantum view, you cannot heal only for yourself. Consciousness doesn't operate that way. When you rise, you lift others, sometimes without ever speaking a word. When you stop being pulled around by every storm in your mind, you become an anchor, a quiet shoreline for others who are drowning. Your presence alone invites them to breathe again. And in that moment, they don't feel your personality. They feel the field working through you. That is the quiet miracle of entanglement. That is the quiet truth of collective consciousness. Science tells us connected particles never truly separate. Spiritual wisdom tells us people never truly walk alone. You see, these two teachings are not competing views. They're the same melody, simply played on different instruments. So tonight, in your own space, maybe in a familiar chair, maybe after a long day that has worn you down, I want you to feel this. A stream of energy is flowing through you, not from the outside, but from the deepest part of who you are. The same stream is flowing through me. It is flowing through millions of people at this very moment. It doesn't ask whether you deserve it. It doesn't check whether you've made mistakes. It simply flows, constantly, quietly, lovingly. When we remember this, something inside us relaxes. We stop trying to control life. We stop fighting every moment. We loosen our grip just like a river that finally stops pushing against its own current, and we allow ourselves to be carried by something wiser than fear. And in this soft surrender, we begin to hear what the universe has been whispering all along. You are not walking this path alone. Every step you take is held by the whole. This is where our journey begins, through quantum science, into personal awareness, and finally into the vastness of the collective field. And once this door opens, you see clearly healing yourself is not selfish. It is the greatest gift you could ever offer to the world. 1. Quantum entanglement as the mirror of a deeper connection. There's a certain tenderness that appears when you begin to see the world not as a collection of isolated lives, but as a woven fabric of experiences that echo through one another. Quantum entanglement, for all its complexity in textbooks and scientific papers, is really pointing us back to this simple, living truth. When two things have truly touched, they never return to being strangers. The connection may become quiet, or even invisible to the eyes, but it continues beneath the surface, like an old river that still knows the shape of the land it once carved. The scientific explanation is straightforward. When two particles have interacted, they become linked in a way that defies physical distance. Change one particle, and the other responds instantly, even if it is on the other side of the universe. But what interests me is not the mathematics behind it. What moves me is how familiar it feels, almost like the universe is revealing a secret we have sensed since childhood. Most people have experienced moments where they think of someone just seconds before that person calls, and while the world may label that as coincidence, there is a deeper wisdom beneath it. A recognition that consciousness behaves more like a field than a contained object. In that field, thoughts and emotions travel in subtle waves, touching others long before any words are exchanged. You may never see the wave with your eyes, but your heart feels it, and the body responds with a quiet understanding. Think of how often your inner world has reacted to something before your mind had any explanation. You feel a sudden warmth when someone dear is thinking lovingly of you. You sense heaviness long before someone confesses they've been struggling. You walk into a space where no one has spoken yet, and your body already knows, whether it carries joy or sorrow. These moments are gentle reminders that we are not isolated islands drifting through time. We are currents moving within the same ocean of awareness. And when you imagine consciousness as that ocean, everything begins to make sense. Each person becomes a ripple, shaped not only by their own movement, but by every wave that surrounds them. A ripple never exists alone. It responds to the wind, to the tide, and to the echoes of distant waves that originated from shores it may never see. In the same way, your thoughts and your emotions affect the field around you, sometimes more than you realize. There were times in my life when I believed my inner struggles were mine alone to bear. But the older I became, and the more deeply I listened, the clearer it became that the pain I carried was not living in isolation. Others felt the resonance of it, just as I felt theirs. And just as my suffering had seeped outward, so did my healing. The moments when I softened, when I allowed myself to breathe instead of resist, created small pockets of calm that others could step into. I didn't need to speak a word. The field spoke for me. This is where quantum entanglement becomes more than a scientific concept. It becomes a mirror showing how every life you touch leaves a mark on the field that surrounds you. A mirror revealing that the moments of deep connection you've experienced, those times when you felt seen without explanation or comforted without words, were not accidents. They were the natural movement of entangled lives responding to one another. You may recall a time from years ago when a friend suddenly came to mind and you felt the urge to reach out, or an evening when you sensed danger before it arrived, or a moment when someone's presence calmed you without them offering any advice. These are the everyday expressions of entanglement, not mystical, not dramatic, just the quiet language of a shared field. To understand this is to understand the responsibility we carry for the energy we cultivate inside ourselves. Because if you are a ripple in an ocean, then every shift in your frequency moves outward. When you heal something within you, an old wound, a buried fear, a lingering resentment, you don't heal only yourself. The field becomes a little lighter, a little clearer, and the ripples you send out carry a different tone, a différente possibilité. And if you sit with this truth long enough, something begins to soften. You stop seeing your inner world as a private territory and start recognizing it as something that matters to the whole. You no longer dismiss your moments of calm as insignificant, because you begin to understand how deeply others feel the vibrations of your calm. You no longer underestimate the importance of your healing, because you sense how much your healing allows others to rest their burdens, even for a moment. This is why entanglement feels like a reminder, rather than a discovery. It reminds you that every loving thought you've ever held, every breath you've taken in awareness, every moment of presence you've offered to someone else, has mattered more than you know. And every gesture of kindness, no matter how small, has traveled further than your eyes could ever see. When you think of someone and they call, it isn't magic. It is coherence or resonance between 2 points in the same field. When your heart softens and someone miles away feels unexpectedly safe, that too is coherence. When you calm yourself before entering a room and find that the room feels different the moment you step in, that is the field responding to your frequency. And through all of this, you begin to understand a truth that life has been whispering through your experiences. Again and again, you have never been alone in the ways that matter. You have always been part of a larger rhythm, a larger intelligence, a larger field that remembers every connection you have ever made. Quantum entanglement is simply the universe's way of revealing in physics what your heart has known in silence once 2 lives meet. They are bound, not by obligation or control, but by the quiet continuity of shared consciousness. And when you live with that awareness, you walk more gently, you breathe more deliberately, you listen more deeply, because you finally see the truth beneath all truths. You are a ripple in an endless ocean, and every movement within you moves the whole. 2. Consciousness does not live inside the brain, it belongs to the field. There comes a certain point in life, usually after you've walked through enough storms, buried enough illusions, and sat alone with yourself long enough, when you begin to sense that the mind is not the origin of your awareness, but merely a doorway. The brain can shape thoughts, store memories, and translate experiences into understanding. Yet there is something that watches all of it, something that remains untouched, even when the mind is restless or the body is tired. And when you finally feel that quiet watcher inside you, a simple truth begins to rise. Awareness is not contained in the brain, just like the sky is not contained in a single cloud. Awareness belongs to a field much larger than any biology can explain. Some call it the unified field, others the quantum field. But whatever name you give it, it behaves like a vast ocean of presence in which every living being is immersed. In this view, the brain is not the generator of consciousness. It is the receiver. It is the instrument, not the music. And once you see it this way, everything about your inner life begins to make sense in a gentler, more expansive way. The moments when you suddenly know something without knowing how, the times when intuition guides you more accurately than logic ever could, the nights when you feel connected to someone miles away, all of that becomes less mysterious when you understand that we are all drawing from the same field of awareness. Imagine for a moment that every human brain is like a radio. The radio does not create the music. It only tunes into a frequency that was already there, already broadcast, already alive. It receives, amplifies, interprets, and expresses what the invisible waves carry. And consciousness, in this analogy, is the broadcast, an ever-present field of information, possibility, and awareness that surrounds and permeates everything. You and I may be different radios, with our own histories, our own capacities, our own unique tones. But the frequency we are tuning into comes from the same source. This way of seeing dissolves the sense that each person is alone inside their mind, trapped behind their skull like a prisoner of their own thoughts. Instead, you begin to feel that your awareness extends beyond the edges of your skin, that your thoughts are shaped not only by your past, but by the vibrations you absorb from others, and that every moment you soften, you are tuning your inner radio closer to the frequency of peace that the field is always transmitting. And when one radio shifts into a clearer, steadier wavelength, it influences all the radios around it. You've felt this before, even if you didn't have the language for it. Think of those rare individuals whose presence brings calm without any effort. They don't lecture, they don't perform. They simply walk into the room carrying a frequency that steadies the entire space. Conversations slow down, breathing softens, hearts unclench, not because they force anything, but because they have tuned themselves into a more coherent, grounded wavelength, and everyone around them begins to resonate with it without realizing why. This is the nature of field consciousness. Awareness is shared, not isolated. It is relational, not individual. The field behaves like a vast symphony, and when one instrument finds its harmony, others gradually fall into tune. In families, you see this clearly. When the most anxious person becomes calm, the household shifts. When the most wounded person begins healing, the unspoken tensions loosen. You don't have to explain peace for others to feel it. Peace speaks in vibrations long before it speaks in words. And if you look back through the years, you'll notice that your own life has been shaped by the frequencies you were surrounded by. You became gentle in the presence of gentle people. You learned fear by absorbing the fear of those who raised you. You opened your heart because someone else's open heart resonated within you like a soft melody you wanted to follow. You closed your heart because someone else's wounds taught you that safety required shrinking. The brain may have recorded these lessons, but the field is where you felt them first. When you live with this understanding, you begin to hold your inner world differently. Instead of trying to fix your thoughts through sheer force, you start adjusting your frequency through breath, through presence, through the way you choose to respond rather than react. You become more aware of the energy you bring into your relationships because you realize that the field picks up everything and nothing you carry stays contained within you alone. The beauty of this truth is that it gives you back a sense of quiet power. You realize that you don't have to convince anyone to change. You don't have to argue anyone into awakening. You don't have to fight the world into coherence. All you have to do is tune your own radio gently, steadily, honestly, and the field will take care of the rest. When you soften, others soften. When you expand, others feel the permission to expand. When you thread awareness into your own breath, the people around you unconsciously begin breathing deeper, and the deeper you tune into the field, the more clearly you sense that consciousness was never meant to be a private possession. It is a shared, flowing presence that moves through everyone, like a single melody expressed through many voices. When one voice finds harmony, the whole chorus begins to shift, and in that recognition, life becomes less about controlling your mind and more about opening yourself to the field, the way a radio opens itself to the airwaves by simply tuning, not striving. In the end, none of this is mystical. It is the most natural thing in the world. You are a receiver of awareness, a participant in a shared field, a ripple on the surface of a vast ocean that holds all of us. And when you settle into that truth, not as theory but as lived experience, you begin to see that your awareness was never locked inside your skull. It was always stretching, reaching, resonating, touching others, and being touched in return. The brain may be the instrument, but you are the music that has always belonged to the field. 3. Personal suffering as a distortion in the collective field. There comes a moment in every honest life when you finally recognize that your suffering has never been a private event. You may have carried it alone. You may have endured it in silence. You may have learned to tuck it beneath your ribs so no one could see. But the vibration of that pain has always moved beyond the boundaries of your skin. Fear, anger, grief, resentment. None of these emotions stay neatly inside the body that feels them. They ripple outward, the way a stone dropped into still water sends circles expanding long after the stone has disappeared beneath the surface. And those ripples touch everything in their path, whether another person is aware of them or not. Most people think of suffering as something inward, something contained, something that begins and ends within the mind of the one who feels it. But when you begin to look at life through the understanding of the field, this shared ocean of consciousness that connects all beings, you start to see that suffering is not a sealed container. It is a frequency, and every frequency travels. Every fear radiates like static. Every suppressed wound hums like a low vibration beneath the floorboards of a home. Every unspoken rage seeps into the emotional climate of a family. Every unresolved trauma colors the way a person looks at the world, and that way of seeing spills quietly into the world around them. And if you've lived long enough, you've felt this firsthand. You've stepped into a space and immediately sensed that something was wrong, even if nothing had been said. You've looked at the face of someone dear and felt the tremor of their fear before they admitted it. You've held the hand of someone hurting, and their pain entered your chest as if your body had become a mirror. This is not imagination. It is the field responding. It is the truth that nothing you hold light or heavy remains entirely yours. When fear rises in one person, others pick up the signal. A frightened person changes the atmosphere of an entire room, not because they intend to, but because fear vibrates loudly in the field. Anger spreads the same way. It sharpens the air. It creates static that the bodies of others instinctively respond to. Even silent resentment, the kind that never becomes words, casts a shadow that others sense. Children especially are sensitive to these shadows. Their bodies tighten. Their breathing changes. Their behavior shifts, not because of what they are told, but because of what they feel rippling through the field around them. And when you look at society through this lens, things become painfully clear. The collective unrest we see in the world is not born from abstract forces. It is born from individuals carrying unresolved suffering. A society becomes chaotic when the people within it are hurting but unhealed. You see it on the streets, in the way people rush, collide, curse, or withdraw. You see it in families where tension becomes a second language. You see it in communities where mistrust grows faster than kindness. You see it in nations where wounds from generations past still echo through the behaviors of the present. Society is nothing more than a field created by the inner worlds of millions of individuals. And when those inner worlds are fractured, the field trembles. But here is where the truth softens. If suffering can distort the field, healing can restore it. The moment one person begins to turn inward, not to escape the world, but to understand their own turbulence, the field begins to quiet. When one person releases an old fear, they reduce the static they have been unknowingly transmitting into the lives of others. When one person softens their anger, the people around them breathe a little easier. When one person forgives themselves, their presence becomes less sharp, less defensive, less reactive, and the relationships connected to them become gentler without anyone needing to discuss it. Healing is not loud, but it is powerful. It is the quiet rewiring of the field. Think of a family where one person finally chooses to break the cycle of inherited pain. That person is not only healing themselves, they are changing the emotional inheritance of generations that come after them. Think of a friendship where one person learns to communicate with honesty instead of hiding behind walls. That honesty becomes a permission slip for the other to do the same. Think of a partnership where one person learns to breathe deeply during conflict rather than escalate. That calm becomes a lifeline the other can subconsciously reach for. Healing is not selfish. It is service. The field becomes clearer each time someone chooses to face their own suffering with compassion rather than fear. And if you reflect on your own life, you'll see evidence of this everywhere. There were periods when your pain made you more reactive, more guarded, more distant. You may not have intentionally hurt anyone, but the vibration of your suffering affected them just the same. And then, during the times when you softened, when you breathed more consciously, forgave more freely, or let go of something heavy, you noticed how the people around you responded with more gentleness, more trust, more warmth. Your healing changed them, even when they did not know what had changed inside you. This is why personal healing is never personal. It is relational. It belongs to the field. Every wound you mend becomes one less fracture in the fabric of the whole. Every fear you dissolve becomes one less tremor in the collective. Every bit of compassion you extend toward your own pain adds coherence to a field that is starving for coherence. A single healed heart becomes a stable point in the field, and others unconsciously gravitate toward that stability. Healing spreads the way. Suffering spreads quietly, invisibly, but unmistakably. And when you understand this, you begin to approach your own pain with a different kind of tenderness. You no longer feel ashamed of it. You no longer rush to hide it. You begin to see your suffering as a place where the field has been disrupted, and your healing as the act of bringing harmony back into a larger system. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "How can my healing serve the whole?" And that shift alone changes the frequency you broadcast. In the end, the truth is simple in a way that only the deepest truths are: your suffering has never been yours alone, and neither will your healing be. You are part of a field that feels everything you carry. When you hurt, the field trembles. When you heal, the field steadies. And when you begin to walk with awareness of this, you become not only a participant in the field, but a steward of its coherence. The world becomes gentler because you have chosen to become gentler within yourself. The field becomes clearer because you have chosen to clear your own heart, and the collective becomes less restless because one more person quietly, humbly, steadily has remembered that healing oneself is also healing the whole. 4. Personal joy also spreads, and science has already measured it. There is a quiet truth about joy that most people overlook throughout their lives, perhaps because suffering feels heavier and gets more attention, while joy often slips in gently, without asking for recognition. But once you have lived long enough, once you have walked through your share of darkness, and finally touched the softness of your own healing, you begin to see joy not as a private emotion, but as a frequency with consequences far beyond your own heart. And this is not poetic exaggeration. This is something science has stepped forward to confirm, something researchers now call emotional contagion, the way feelings pass from one person to another, like an invisible current, shaping the inner weather of everyone in a shared space. Researchers studying emotional contagion have shown again and again that human beings synchronize with each other's emotional states more deeply than we consciously realize. In one well-known study, scientists observed groups of people interacting in ordinary settings, offices, classrooms, social gatherings, and found that when even one person carried a noticeably positive state, their presence shifted the emotional tone of the entire group within minutes. Without speaking about joy, without announcing their mood, without trying to influence anyone, they altered the field simply by being tuned to a higher frequency. The nervous systems of those around them adjusted quietly, as if responding to a more coherent signal. And if you think back through your own life, you will see this truth everywhere. You have walked into rooms where stress seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog, and instantly your chest tightened. You have stepped into spaces where people laughed with genuine warmth, and your body loosened without effort. You have met those rare individuals who carry a calm so grounded that your own breath slows the moment you sit beside them. These experiences are not coincidences. They are evidence of the field responding to the vibration of a single person. Joy is not a static feeling. It is a radiant one. It moves outward the way a lantern lights not only the hand that holds it but the path around it. And when someone lifts their frequency through gratitude, through clarity, through presence, through healing the people around them, feel it whether they can explain it or not. A parent who becomes more peaceful changes the nervous system of their children. A friend who learns to live with more ease becomes a silent permission for others to soften. A coworker who carries a steady lightness shifts the rhythm of the entire workplace. This is how joy travels quietly, humbly, but unmistakably. And perhaps you've experienced this in your own home. During those evenings when someone you love returns with a softened face, a light in their eyes you didn't expect. You may not know what changed in their day, but you feel the room brighten as soon as they walk in. The conversations feel smoother. The silence feels restful instead of tense. And even the smallest tasks like preparing a meal or sitting at the table take on a gentle ease. This is the field adjusting to the frequency they bring. When one person rises, the atmosphere rises with them. The opposite is just as true, which is why the contrast feels so striking. When someone carries unresolved agitation, the field becomes unsettled. When someone carries calm, the field steadies. The nervous system reads these signals instantly, long before the mind has time to interpret them. And that is why the presence of a calm, joyful person does not just change how a room feels. It changes how your body feels. It shifts the tension in your shoulders, the pace of your breath, the rhythm of your thoughts. Because joy, like pain, is not confined to the one who experiences it. It is shared, transmitted through subtle cues, the micro movements of the face, the tone of the voice, the tempo of the breath, the openness of the posture, and through even subtler, deeper waves within the field. But the beauty of joy is that it does not require perfection. You do not need to be endlessly cheerful or force yourself into positivity. In fact, Forced joy carries no frequency at all. It is only a mask. The kind of joy that spreads is the joy that comes from inner coherence, from being aligned with yourself, from releasing what you no longer need to hold. It is the joy that arises naturally when you stop fighting life and begin allowing it to flow through you without resistance. This kind of joy is not loud. It does not seek attention. It does not need to be displayed. It simply radiates, quietly and steadily, like the heat from a peaceful fire. Think of that one person in your life whose presence alone softened you. Perhaps it was a grandparent who never rushed, whose eyes held patience even when you made mistakes. Perhaps it was a teacher who seemed to understand you without judgment. Perhaps it was a friend who listened without interrupting or trying to fix you. These people carried a frequency of steadiness that your nervous system recognized instantly. They did not have to give advice. Their presence was the medicine. And when you understand that joy moves through the field this way, you begin to hold your own joy differently. You no longer dismiss it as trivial or selfish, because you realize that your joy becomes part of the emotional climate. Others breathe in. A joyful person is not escaping the world. They are nourishing it. They are bringing a frequency into the field that makes others feel safer, lighter, more open. Joy is not indulgence. Joy is contribution. There are people who believe that their suffering is what connects them to others, that being weighed down makes them more human, more empathetic. But in truth, it is your joy, your clarity, your steadiness that provides a foundation others can trust. When you heal enough to hold genuine joy, not as a performance, but as a natural state, you become someone others can lean against. Your presence becomes a resting place. Your energy becomes the quiet reassurance that peace is possible. This is why healing matters, not only to relieve your pain, but to restore your joy. Because your joy becomes part of the collective field. When one person finds a way to stand in joy, even after being broken, even after walking through fire, they show others what is possible. Their very existence whispers, you can come home to yourself too. So when you lift your frequency, you are not lifting it for yourself alone. You are lifting it for your family, your community, your relationships, and for every soul whose path intersects with yours. Your joy becomes a lighthouse. Your joy becomes a tuning fork. Your joy becomes a ripple that transforms the emotional climate of everyone around you. And the field remembers, the field responds, the field grows quieter, softer, more coherent because you chose to rise. In the end, joy is not just a feeling, it is an offering. And when it radiates from someone who has known darkness, who has walked through sorrow with trembling hands, who has rebuilt themselves piece by piece, the joy becomes one of the most powerful healing forces in the collective field. It becomes proof that the heart can return to warmth, that the mind can return to clarity, and that life can return to wholeness even after being shattered. And when such joy spreads, it does not merely brighten a room, it changes the field for all of us. 5. A collective can only be strong when each individual comes home to themselves. There is a truth that becomes clearer the longer you live, the more seasons you survive, and the more you learn to sit quietly with your own contradictions. It is the truth that no community, no family, no circle of friends, no society can be healthier than the individuals who shape it. We often speak of collective healing as if it were a mission that begins out there, somewhere outside the boundaries of our own skin. But the older you get, the more you realize that any attempt to build a harmonious collective while carrying unresolved wounds inside yourself is like trying to construct a sturdy house on trembling ground. The structure may stand for a moment, but it will always be fragile, always be vulnerable to the slightest shift, because its foundation has not yet been steadied. A community is not an abstract idea. It is a living field made up of the inner states of its members. And if those members carry unexamined fear, suppressed anger, or pain that has been ignored for years, That unhealed energy becomes part of the emotional fabric of the whole. You can see this clearly in the smallest units of society. A family where parents carry old wounds will feel unstable, even on quiet days. A workplace where leadership is filled with insecurity will struggle to foster trust. A neighborhood where people are guarded and disconnected will always feel unsafe, no matter how many rules are put in place. The energy of the collective is nothing more than the sum of the individuals within it. And this is why the journey inward, often seen as solitary or even selfish, is actually one of the most generous things you can do for the world. Eckhart Tolle once expressed this with profound simplicity. You heal the collective by stepping out of your personal ego. And when you sit with those words long enough, you begin to sense their weight. The ego is the part of you that clings to old narratives, that reacts from fear, that feels threatened by difference, that carries pain as identity, that needs to be right more than it needs to be at peace. When the ego governs your life, the field around you becomes tense, distorted, filled with static. But when you begin to loosen the ego's grip even just a little, the field around you changes. The atmosphere softens, conversations deepen, conflict dissolve faste. Life becomes less about protecting your wounds and more about understanding them. Returning to yourself does not mean becoming isolated or self-centered. It means turning inward long enough to understand what has shaped you, what still burdens you, and what no longer belongs in your hands. It means recognizing the places where you feel small, defensive, rigid, or frightened, not to judge them, but to free them. And as you do, something remarkable happens. Your frequency changes. You begin to move from a vibration of contraction to one of openness, from reactivity to presence, from survival to coherence. And the moment your frequency shifts, the field around you shifts with it. You've seen this in your own life. When you are weighed down by your inner storms, even the simplest interactions feel strained. The people around you pick up on your agitation. Often without knowing why, the field becomes tight, brittle. But when you come home to yourself, when you breathe deeply, forgive honestly, or allow a hidden wound to soften rather than harden, the way people respond to you changes. The conversations feel easier, the air around you feels lighter, and relationships that once felt complicated begin to flow with unexpected grace. This is not coincidence. This is resonance. Every healed individual becomes a stabilizing force in the collective. They become someone who can listen without needing to defend, who can love without needing to possess, who can be present without needing to control. Their presence becomes like a grounded tree in the center of a windy field, steady, rooted, unshaken, and others naturally gravitate toward that stability, without saying anything, without offering advice, without imposing their philosophy. They shift the emotional climate simply by being aligned within themselves. You might think of someone in your own life who holds this kind of presence, someone who has weathered storms but no longer carries the storm inside them, someone who has learned to breathe through difficulty instead of collapsing under it, someone who sees clearly because they are no longer blinded by past wounds. These people are not perfect, they are simply present, and that presence, cultivated through their own inward journey, becomes a gift to everyone who encounters them. And if you extend this understanding to the level of society, a profound truth emerges. Collective transformation can only occur through individual awakening. No political structure, no economic system, no social reform can compensate for individuals who are disconnected from themselves. A peaceful society cannot be built by people who are at war with their own hearts. A compassionate community cannot be built by people who have not learned to be compassionate with their own wounds. The world changes not by force, but by frequency. This is why the work of returning to yourself, of healing old wounds, dissolving old narratives, softening old fears, is sacred work. When you change the frequency of your inner world, you change the field of the outer world. When you release what weighs you down, you create space for others to rise. When you stop operating from pain, you stop adding distortion to the collective. And as your heart becomes clearer, your presence becomes a signal, a quiet, steady signal that invites others to remember their own wholeness. Healing yourself does not isolate you from the collective. It prepares you to serve it. It allows you to show up without needing to fix others or change them, because you understand that the most powerful change happens through resonance, not through force. Your coherence becomes a tuning point. Your presence becomes a mirror that reflects back to others what is possible, and your frequency becomes part of the invisible architecture that supports the healing of the whole. So the truth is simple. Though not always easy to accept, a collective becomes strong when individuals become grounded, awake, and true. A community becomes harmonious when its members stop abandoning themselves. And the field becomes balanced when each person returns to their own center, not to escape the world, but to bring clarity into it. When you come home to yourself, the world feels the shift, and in that shift, the collective finally begins to heal. 6. Personal healing is a gift to the whole. There comes a moment on the inner journey when you finally understand that healing yourself is not an act of self-indulgence, nor is it a quiet chapter meant to be hidden from the world. It is, in the deepest and most grounded sense, an offering, because every wound you soften inside yourself becomes one less wound vibrating in the collective field, and every layer of truth you reclaim becomes a pathway that others, your children, your loved ones, even strangers, can walk through more easily. Healing is personal, yes, but it is never private. It is a silent ripple that moves outward long after you have done the inner work. When you let go of an old belief that has kept you small, frightened, or frozen, you aren't simply freeing yourself from a burden, you are loosening a knot that may have existed in your family line for generations. Many of the fears people carry did not begin with them. They were handed down quietly, unconsciously, like invisible heirlooms wrapped in caution and pain. Your parents received them from their parents, who received them from theirs. Over time, these inherited beliefs settle into the bones of a family, shaping choices, silencing desires, and creating patterns that repeat themselves in different forms throughout the years. So when you choose to release a belief that says you are unworthy, or unsafe, or not enough, you are not being dramatic or spiritual. You are breaking a chain that your ancestors may never have had the chance to break. The moment you loosen the grip of a story that has been passed down without question, you create space for your children, your siblings, and the generations that follow to grow without carrying that weight. The lineage becomes lighter because you dared to stop repeating the old patterns in a very real way. You become the point in your family line where the old story ends and a new one begins. And the same is true for emotional wounds that shape behavior. When someone learns how to love themselves after a lifetime of self-criticism or shame, they do much more than soften their own inner world. They interrupt cycles of unconscious harm that might have otherwise continued. People often think of abuse or emotional neglect as dramatic, beastly events, but most of the suffering passed through families is subtle, woven into the tone of a voice, the absence of affection, the inability to express feelings safely. These forms of pain echo across generations not because anyone intends to cause harm, but because no one ever learned another way. When you begin to treat yourself with gentleness, when you learn to speak to yourself without cruelty, when you learn to hold your own story without judgment, you are not only healing your own heart, you are teaching everyone around you that a different way is possible. You may have noticed this in your own life. When you begin showing yourself compassion instead of harshness, the people close to you become more willing to soften toward themselves. When you learn to set boundaries with clarity instead of anger, people feel less threatened and more able to listen. When you learn to forgive not as an act of forgetting, but as a release from the prison of resentment, the energy in your relationships begins to shift. Healing changes the emotional architecture of your connections in ways that words alone cannot accomplish. Others feel the difference in your presence, in the steadiness of your energy, in the way conversations unfold with more honesty and less defensiveness. And slowly, almost invisibly, the healing spreads. A mother who heals teaches her children safety through her presence, not her lectures. A father who heals breaks the pattern of emotional silence that his father and grandfather lived inside. A friend who heals becomes a mirror that reflects back to others the possibility of tenderness. A leader who heals turns a community from fear-driven to trust-driven. This is how personal transformation becomes collective transformation, not through pressure or persuasion, but through resonance. Because every healed person vibrates differently, they send out a signal into the field that others can feel, even if they never speak of their journey. When someone heals, they become less reactive, less entangled in old narratives, less controlled by buried pain. They stop creating unnecessary conflict. They stop needing to project their wounds onto others. They stop feeding cycles of blame or shame. Instead, they bring coherence to the spaces they inhabit. Their presence becomes a kind of quiet gravity, something people naturally gather around because it feels safe, steady, and real. And when more than one person in a community begins to heal, the shifts become noticeable, conversations deepen, conflict resolve more quickly, old grievances fade because people no longer cling to them with the same intensity. Decisions are made with more clarity and less fear. The atmosphere becomes lighter, not because life is suddenly easy, but because the emotional clutter that once distorted the field has begun to dissolve. The transformation of a community always begins with the transformation of individuals. A community is only as conscious as the people who form it. And when even one person takes responsibility for their inner world, choosing truth over denial, softness over rigidity, and awareness over unconscious habit, they become a beacon for others who have been quietly longing for the same shift. Healing is contagious, in the same way joy is contagious. It creates resonance. It invites possibility. It opens doorways. You might think of someone you know who has walked through their own darkness and emerged with more humility, more compassion, more presence. Being around them feels different, more grounded, more alive, more peaceful. They do not need to preach their healing. It lives in the way they breathe, in the way they listen, in the way they carry themselves with ease. And because of them, you feel a little braver, a little more willing to face your own pain. That is the gift of personal healing. It expands far beyond the one who heals. So when you sit with your own wounds, when you decide to meet them instead of running from them, when you choose to let go of the stories that no longer reflect who you truly are, you are not merely healing your life. You are healing the field. You are reducing the static that has been passed down through generations. You are creating coherence in spaces where there was once confusion. You are freeing your lineage from the gravity of its unspoken pain. And whether you realize it or not, you are offering your transformation to everyone around you. In the end, this is the quiet truth. Personal healing is never personal. It is a gift that moves through families, through relationships, through communities, through the field itself. When you change your frequency, you change the frequencies of those connected to you. When you come home to yourself, you give others the courage to do the same. And in that way, your healing becomes the seed of a future where the collective carries less suffering, not because the world has changed overnight, but because one person, one brave, honest, the tender person chose to change the world within themselves. 7. The collective is one body. Each person is a single cell. There is a certain clarity that comes only after years of living, after the heart has been broken open more than once, after you've carried both the weight of your own suffering and the quiet responsibility of loving others. In that clarity, life reveals itself not as a cluster of isolated experiences, but as something deeply interconnected, something that moves through all of us the same way blood moves through every cell of the human body. And once you truly see this, you begin to understand that humanity is not a collection of separate lives, but a single living organism, and each of us is a cell within it. The well-being of the whole depends intimately on the well-being of each individual. Just as the health of the human body depends on the health of each cell, if you picture a body, you immediately know that it cannot thrive while its cells are inflamed, diseased, or starving. The body does not heal from the outside inward. It heals because each cell is functioning, communicating, and cooperating in harmony with the others. And a healthy cell does not live only for itself. It sends signals of vitality to the cells around it. It supports the tissues it belongs to. It contributes to the stability of the entire organism. Simply by being well, the body becomes stronger not because it forces itself into strength, but because the smallest units within it come into balance. Human beings are no different, whether we realize it or not. We are constantly sending and receiving signals through our emotions, our presence, our tone, our breath, our intention, our inner coherence. When we are agitated or frightened or wounded, we emit signals of disturbance that ripple outward into the collective field. But when we become calm, when we become aware, when we become anchored in ourselves, our presence becomes a stabilizing force in the invisible body of our shared humanity. Think for a moment about a time in your life when someone else's steadiness saved you, not through words, not through advice, but through something in them that felt rooted, grounded, dependable. You may have been panicked or overwhelmed, but being near them softened your edges. Their calm didn't erase your challenges, but it made them easier to breathe through. That person was a healthy cell supporting the greater body. Their well-being created a ripple that allowed your own nervous system to settle, even if just for a moment. And if you look back further, you can probably recall a time when your presence did the same for someone else. Maybe you didn't realize it at the time, but your stillness helped another person find their center. Your patience created space for someone else's honesty. Your gentleness allowed another heart to open. In those moments, you weren't doing anything extraordinary. You were simply being aligned within yourself, and that alignment carried a healing signal outward, the way a healthy cell supports the healing of nearby cells. The truth is that each of us participates in the emotional and energetic immune system of the collective. When we become reactive, the field becomes reactive. When we become grounded, the field becomes grounded. When we fall into despair, the field becomes heavier, and the people closest to us feel it. But when we tap into peace, even fragile, trembling peace, the field becomes a little clearer, a little more coherent, a little safer for others to inhabit. In families, this becomes painfully obvious. A single person's unresolved trauma can shape the emotional climate of an entire household, but a single person's healing can also transform the family system. When one person decides to stop repeating the patterns handed down through generations, the emotional atmosphere begins to shift. Conversations soften. Conflict resolve more quickly. The unspoken tension that once lingered like a fog begins to lift. One healthy cell changes the tone of the entire family body. The same is true for communities. A neighborhood where people greet each other with kindness feels different from a neighborhood where everyone is guarded. A workplace where one person chooses presence over panic can change the rhythm of the entire team. A spiritual group where one person sits in genuine compassion can become the anchor that allows others to open without fear. The energy we carry is never contained. It radiates, influencing the field in subtle but profound ways. And if you expand your view even further to cities, nations, to the global collective, you begin to sense the magnitude of this truth. The unrest in the world is not random. It is the collective expression of millions of people carrying pain they have not yet had the chance to heal. But just as inflammation is not cured by punishing the body, Collective suffering is not eased by forcing society into shape. It softens because enough individuals begin tending to the wounds within themselves. When enough cells recover, the organism begins to find balance. When enough people come home to themselves, the world becomes a less hostile place. This is why your healing matters more than you think. Your calm is not small. Your clarity is not insignificant. Your presence, steady, aware, grounded, becomes nourishment for the collective body. When you breathe deeply, instead of reacting, you stabilize the emotional field around you. When you speak with kindness rather than fear, the people connected to you feel safer. When you choose truth over denial, you make it easier for others to be honest. When you stand in your center, you help others find theirs. Being a healthy cell in the human body does not require perfection. It requires awareness. It requires the willingness to meet your own pain with honesty rather than pushing it outward. It requires the courage to soften where you once hardened, to listen where you once defended, to forgive where you once held on. And every time you do, the signals you send into the collective shift. You see, healing is not loud. It does not announce itself. It moves quietly through the field, the way warmth spreads from one ember to another, until the entire fire begins to glow again. When you return to peace, even imperfectly, you are broadcasting coherence into a field that desperately needs it. Your presence becomes a sanctuary. Your energy becomes a reminder that gentleness is possible. In the end, this is the deepest truth of all. The collective body depends on the health of its individual cells. And your task in this lifetime is not to fix the entire organism, but to tend to your own part in it, to care for your inner world, so that what you radiate supports life rather than depleting it, to become a source of steadiness rather than chaos, to be the calm that others can rest near. When you do this, you may not see the full impact of your healing, but the field feels it. The people around you feel it. The collective body grows a little stronger because you chose to become whole. 8. The power of a frequency-matched group. When a community rises together, there comes a point on this path where you realize that healing is not only a solitary journey carried out in the quiet corners of your own heart. It is also something that awakens naturally, when people gather with a shared intention, when individual frequencies begin to resonate with each other and form something larger, steadier, and more luminous than any one person could hold alone. And if you have ever sat in a room where many people are meditating, or praying, or simply breathing with sincerity, you already know how dramatically the atmosphere can shift when hearts begin to open together. Something softens in the air. Something warms. Something becomes possible. Science has a word for this phenomenon: coherence, the state in which multiple systems begin to synchronize, beating not in uniformity, but in harmony. Coherence doesn't arise from force. It arises when each participant settles into their own inner alignment, allowing their nervous system, their breath, and their attention to fall into a natural pattern of steadiness. When one person reaches this state, the room feels subtly different. But when many people enter coherence together, the field becomes unmistakably transformed. It thickens with presence. It vibrates with a quiet unity. It becomes a container that holds each person more gently than they could ever hold themselves. Imagine the way a group of musicians warms up before a performance. At first, the sounds are scattered strings, tuning in different directions. Wind instruments, testing their breath. Percussion tapping irregularly. But then something shifts. Each musician begins tuning themselves, listening closely, aligning their instrument not by force, but by awareness. And as soon as each one comes into their correct pitch, the harmony emerges that seems to appear from nowhere. The individual sounds don't disappear, they interweave, forming a single voice made of many parts. This is the essence of a frequency-matched community, not sameness, but resonance. When a group of people meditates together, Something very similar happens. Each person begins with their own thoughts, their own worries, the residue of their own day. The field might feel scattered, a little tight, a little restless. But as the minutes pass, one person's breath deepens, another person's shoulders loosen, another's mind becomes quieter, and gradually the collective field begins to synchronize, without speaking, without planning, without any outward signal. Their nervous systems begin to influence one another. One person's calm supports the next person's calm, and the next, until the entire group is breathing in a shared rhythm. Coherence takes shape, and in that coherence, healing becomes magnified. Gratitude feels fuller. Insight arrives more easily. Even silence feels alive. In a coherent field, individuals access deeper layers of awareness because the field itself is holding them. The group is not pulling them downward into tension. It is lifting them upward into spaciousness. It is expanding their capacity to feel, to release, to open. This is why spiritual traditions throughout history have emphasized the power of community practice, not because gathering makes one holier, but because gathering creates a larger field of coherence, where each person's frequency affects the whole. When many hearts choose gratitude at the same time, gratitude amplifies. When many nervous systems settle at the same time, peace becomes almost tangible. When many minds aim toward clarity at the same time, clarity becomes easier to access for everyone involved. And this amplification is not mystical, it is deeply human. You have felt its everyday form many times. Think of a family meal where everyone is relaxed, laughing softly, speaking with warmth, how there is a sense of ease that arises not from one person, but from the combined resonance of everyone present. Or think of a moment at a concert when the entire audience sings together, and something inside you feels lifted beyond your own voice, carried by a surge of shared feeling. Or even a simple gathering of friends where the conversation flows so naturally that hours pass without effort. These moments arise because coherence has formed among the people involved. Coherence is also the reason conflict in a group can dissolve when just one person chooses to stay centered instead of reacting. Their calm becomes a tuning fork. Others feel it. Others settle. Others begin echoing the steadiness they didn't know they needed. One aligned person can shift a small group, but many aligned people can shift an entire community. And when enough communities shift, society itself feels different. This is the hidden intelligence of a frequency-matched group. It creates a collective nervous system that can hold more love, more clarity, more truth than any individual could maintain alone. And this collective nervous system becomes a refuge. It becomes a place where people who have lived their whole lives in survival mode can finally breathe. It becomes a place where those who have carried their wounds silently can feel safe enough to release them. It becomes a place where the collective field lifts suffering not by erasing it, but by surrounding it with coherence until it begins to dissolve on its own. If you have ever joined a meditation circle, you likely remember the moment when the silence became thick, when it felt less like something you were doing and more like something happening through you. If you have ever experienced group gratitude, you probably remember how your heart felt brighter, fuller, more present than when you practice gratitude alone. And if you have ever stood in the presence of people who were collectively grounded, you know how it feels to be held by a field that says, without words, you are safe to be here. A frequency-matched group does not need everyone to be perfect. It simply needs individuals who are willing to return to themselves again and again, to tune their own internal instruments until they resonate with truth rather than fear, with presence rather than distraction, with softness rather than defense. And when enough people do that, the field they create becomes a force of healing not through effort, but through natural coherence. The gift of such a community is profound. It reminds you that you do not have to walk this path alone. It shows you that your calm is not only yours, it allows you to borrow steadiness when your own feels shaky. It teaches you that healing is not just personal but relational, not just internal but collective. And in a world that often feels fragmented, scattered, and overwhelmed, the power of a group that can breathe in coherence becomes a quiet revolution. One breath, one heartbeat, one shared frequency at a time. In the end, the truth is simple and gently transformative. When each individual aligns with their own inner harmony, the community begins to resonate with unity. When enough individuals raise their vibration, a shared field of coherence emerges. And in that field, healing doesn't just happen, it multiplies. A new kind of music begins to rise, created not by a single instrument, but by an entire orchestra tuning itself to the frequency of truth. 9. Small actions carry great consequence in the collective field. There is a moment, usually after life has humbled you enough times, when you begin to see that the world is not shaped only by grand gestures, revolutions, or dramatic transformations. More often, it is shaped quietly through the small decisions we make when no one is watching, through the tone we choose when speaking to someone fragile, through the breath we take before reacting from fear, through the softness we allow ourselves when the old version of us would have tightened. These seemingly insignificant choices ripple out into the collective field in ways far more powerful than we are conditioned to believe. Because the field is sensitive, not to scale, but to sincerity. Not to volume, but to vibration. A gentle word, a moment of patience, a breath taken with awareness. Each one becomes a wave. Subtle, but real. If you've lived long enough to witness your own evolution, you already know that the smallest moments often change the trajectory of a day, a relationship, or a memory. You may recall a time when someone offered you a kind word on a day when your heart was breaking silently, and though nothing external changed, you felt the weight inside you shift just enough for you to keep going. Or perhaps there was a moment when someone chose not to meet your anger with more anger, and in that pause, in that breath of non-reaction, the entire conversation softened and took a different path. These moments, though small, carry the unmistakable imprint of coherence, tiny corrections in the field that ripple farther than logic can measure. The field does not respond only to dramatic acts. It responds to frequency, and frequency is generated by the quality of your inner world, not the scale of your actions. One person who carries calm into a chaotic environment shifts the atmosphere in a way that 1,000 rules cannot. One person who chooses gentleness in the midst of fear becomes a stabilizing force for everyone around them. One person who pauses before reacting, who breathes instead of attacking can redirect the emotional trajectory of an entire group. It is not the size of what you do, but the state of consciousness from which you do it that determines its impact. We often underestimate these small choices because they do not look heroic. They do not attract applause or recognition. They do not change the visible world in an instant. But beneath the surface, within the field, they are creating waves of coherence that touch the nervous systems of others and invite them towards steadiness. A single act of kindness becomes a signal that interrupts the momentum of unconscious harm. A single moment of presence becomes a reminder that there is another way to move through life, one that doesn't require urgency, defensiveness, or fear. And because the field amplifies coherence, these small acts accumulate, strengthen, and spread. When you begin to recognize your influence in this way, something inside you relaxes. You stop feeling the pressure to save the world, because you realize that the world is not asking for saviors. It is asking for people who are willing to stop adding to its suffering. You begin to understand that your responsibility is not to fix everything outside you, but to tend to what is within you. Because the way you show up in each small moment is a contribution to the emotional climate around you. You may have been taught that your value in the world depends on doing something grand, something remarkable, something that alters history. But the deeper truth, the truth that reveals itself after a lifetime of paying attention, is that the world changes when individuals choose to carry integrity, compassion, and awareness into their smallest interactions. The field does not care about spectacle. It cares about resonance. A single, coherent heart can influence dozens of others without saying a word. Imagine a room full of people, each one carrying their own private worries, irritations, or regrets. The air feels tense, even if no one speaks of it. Then imagine that one person enters the room with a sense of quiet presence, not forced calm, not artificial positivity, but genuine steadiness rooted in their own healing. The atmosphere shifts subtly. People breathe more easily. Conversations feel less sharp, even if no one understands why. The field has been altered by the vibration that person brought with them. This is how small acts change the collective field, not by effort, but by resonance. And the truth is that you are always influencing the field. Whether you intend to or not, your thoughts are not sealed inside your skull. They drift through your posture, your tone, your energy. Your emotional state becomes part of the environment others live in. When you choose a single breath instead of a reactive outburst, you are cooling the field. When you offer a kind word instead of judgment, you are softening the field. When you choose not to pass your pain forward onto someone else, you are protecting the field. Small actions, tiny choices, each one is a contribution. This understanding becomes especially powerful when you realize that every unhealed wound you carry has likely been passed down through generations of people who did not have the tools or awareness to stop the cycle. And now it lands in your hands not to punish you, but to invite you. You become the one who decides whether the cycle continues or ends. And most of the time, it ends not through dramatic transformation, but through small, quiet decisions, choosing kindness over defensiveness, choosing breath over reaction, choosing honesty over silence, choosing presence over avoidance. It is the same with the collective tensions in society. The world does not heal because of grand declarations. It heals when enough people choose to stop adding anger, fear, and division into the field. When enough people choose to listen instead of argue, to understand instead of attack, to breathe instead of blame, the field shifts. These are not small acts. They are the foundation of collective coherence. In your own life, you have already been shaped by the small acts of others. A teacher who spoke gently to you in a moment of shame, a friend who sat quietly beside you in a moment of loss, a stranger who smiled at you when you felt invisible. These moments mattered, but they mattered because they altered the field around you, even if only slightly, and that shift helped you move differently through the world. So when you feel powerless in the face of the world's suffering, remember this: you do not need to save the world. You simply need to stop hurting it. Let your words carry a little more kindness. Let your breath create a little more space. Let your presence offer a little more steadiness. These small choices are not insignificant. They are the quiet architecture of collective change. And as you continue to make them, consistently, humbly, sincerely, you will discover that your life, your ordinary, imperfect, human life is shaping the field in ways you may never see, but that others will certainly feel. In the end, the world does not change through grand gestures. It changes because people like you choose to bring a different frequency into the spaces you inhabit. And when enough people do that, the collective field becomes something steadier, gentler, and more alive, one small wave at a time. 10. When you change, you become a living proof of humanity's capacity to transform. There is a certain softness that comes over you when you finally understand that your personal transformation is not only about your life, your healing, or your happiness. It is also about the echo you leave in the world every time you shift something fundamental within yourself. Because whether you realize it or not, You are always teaching others how to live, not through your words, not through your philosophy, but through the quiet truth of who you become. And when you change, sincerely and deeply, you become a living example of what is possible for every human being who crosses your path. Most people do not believe they can change until they see change happening in someone they trust. They need a mirror, a reference point, a human example of transformation that does not feel distant or impossible. And when you become that example, when you soften where you once hardened, when you breathe where you once reacted, when you forgive where you once held on the people around you, feel something shift inside their own hearts. You are no longer just yourself. You are a reminder that healing is real, that peace is reachable, that awakening is not reserved for the lucky few, but can happen in ordinary bodies, in ordinary lives, in people who have carried pain just like they have pranked. You become a living proof of awakening, not because you speak eloquently about it, but because your presence becomes keener, steadier, gentler. Your eyes hold less fear. Your voice carries less urgency. Your choices are no longer shaped by old wounds. You stop leaking anger into conversations. You stop transmitting the chaos that once defined your inner world. And without announcing anything, without trying to be a guide or a teacher, you become someone others instinctively look to, not for answers, but for resonance. Your transformation becomes a silent invitation. Someone who has known you for years might watch you with a mixture of curiosity and hope. They may see the way your shoulders no longer carry the weight they once did, the way you breathe through difficulty rather than collapsing under it, the way you navigate life with a kind of groundedness they never expected. And even if they do not say it aloud, something inside them whispers, if they can change, maybe I can too. You become the proof they didn't know they were waiting for. And this is where the quiet magic of transformation becomes undeniably visible. It spreads. Awakening is contagious. Healing is contagious. Presence is contagious. Not because you are trying to teach, but because the field responds to what you carry. When you change your frequency, the nervous systems of the people around you begin to match it, almost like tuning forks that vibrate when they come near another that has already reached its note. One coherent person in a family can change the dynamics of generations. One grounded person in a community can shift the emotional climate of hundreds. One conscious person in a group of friends can redirect conversations, stabilize conflicts, and inspire honesty simply by being aligned within themselves. This is the domino effect of consciousness. It does not knock people over, it lifts them. It does not demand change, it sparks it. It does not push, it invites. When one person rises, the field around them becomes a little clearer, a little softer, a little more harmonious. And others, without fully understanding why, begin to rise with them. They feel safer to look at their own wounds. They feel less ashamed of their own fears. They feel more willing to breathe rather than fight. Because your transformation reshapes the emotional environment they are living in, and you may not notice this happening, influence in the field is subtle. It moves through tone, through presence, through the way your energy fills a room. But over time, you'll begin to see small signs. A family member who once reacted out of habit now pauses before speaking. A friend who always rushed through life begins to slow down. A coworker who held resentment for years begins to soften. A child begins to trust themselves more because your presence has shown them that safety exists. This is not coincidence. It is resonance in motion. It is the field reorganizing itself around the vibration you have chosen to embody. When you change, you become a lighthouse, not dramatic, not forceful, but steady. You shine by being, not by performing. And in the darkness of someone else's struggle, that steady light becomes orientation. It becomes a direction. It becomes a possibility. You don't have to fix them or guide them. You simply have to keep showing up in the fullness of your own truth, and the field will do the rest. You might doubt your impact, because transformation rarely announces itself in grand gestures. But human beings feel each other in ways far more profound than language. They feel your coherence. They feel your peace. They feel your authenticity. They feel the absence of old defenses. They feel the presence of new clarity. And when they feel this, something in them begins to remember who they once were before life hardened them. They remember their own softness, their own longing, their own capacity to transform. In this way, your evolution becomes an offering. You are not responsible for saving anyone, but by becoming more whole, you offer the world an example of wholeness. By becoming more present, you offer others a glimpse of what presence feels like. By becoming more compassionate, you create permission for compassion in places where it once felt impossible. And by choosing truth over fear, you demonstrate that truth can be lived not perfectly, but sincerely. The beauty of this is that transformation does not need to be dramatic to be powerful. Sometimes the shift that changes another person's life is as simple as the look in your eyes when you have forgiven yourself. Sometimes it is the calm in your breath when you choose not to escalate an argument. Sometimes it is the way you sit with someone's pain without needing to fix it. These small moments carry the frequency of an awakened life, and that frequency echoes in the hearts of others long after the moment has passed. So when you change, when you truly change, you are not only walking your own path, you are clearing a path for others. You are not only rising, you are lifting the field around you. And you are not only healing your life, you are becoming a silent proof of humanity's ability to transform itself from the inside out. This is the quiet truth that reveals itself only to those who have walked through the dark night and emerged with softer eyes. One person who chooses consciousness can elevate many, and as each person rises, the next rise becomes easier. The collective begins to lighten, the field begins to clear, and the story of humanity begins to shift, not because of a single heroic act, but because one person at a time chose to come home to themselves. You are one of those people now, and your transformation, whether you see it or not, is already in motion beyond you. You are the field, and the field has been waiting for your return. There is a certain tenderness that settles into your bones when you finally understand what all of this has been pointing to, not just the science, not just the metaphors, not just the spiritual teachings you've carried with you over the years, but the lived truth beneath it all. Quantum entanglement is not simply a strange physical phenomenon observed in distant laboratories. It is a reminder, a quiet whisper. That separation has always been an illusion the mind clings to when it forgets the deeper nature of reality. When two particles remain connected across impossible distances, they are not performing magic. They are revealing the architecture of existence. And when you feel the pain of someone far away, or the warmth of another's love, without a single word being spoken, you are experiencing that same architecture through the instrument of your own heart. You are not a solitary being drifting through space. You are a node in a living field, a field that holds your memories, your wounds, your dreams, your gestures of kindness, your moments of fear, your unexpected breakthroughs. And this field, delicate yet fast, responds to everything you radiate. When you carry fear, the field tightens. When you nourish peace within yourself, the field softens. When you contract, the field contracts. When you expand, the field expands. It has always been this way, even before you had the language to describe it. This is why personal healing matters so profoundly. Healing is not a private victory. It is a shift in the signal you send into the collective. When you release old patterns of self-blame, you stop transmitting shame into the world. When you tend to the wounds that once controlled you, you stop leaking fear into every space you enter. And when you learn to sit in your own presence without running, without numbing, without collapsing. You bring a kind of coherence to the field that others can feel, even if they never know your story. People often underestimate the impact of their inner world because it does not announce itself with noise or spectacle. But the field feels everything. When you heal, you remove one more thread of fear from the collective fabric, one more knot of confusion, one more vibration of pain that might have touched someone else. Every act of self-compassion becomes an act of compassion for the whole. Every moment of clarity becomes a lantern for others walking in darkness. Every breath you take with awareness steadies the invisible architecture that connects us. And this is the deepest truth that life eventually teaches you. The world becomes lighter not when you try to save it, but when you stop abandoning yourself. The collective becomes more peaceful when enough individuals choose presence over ego, honesty over avoidance, tenderness over self-protection. Because presence has a frequency, ego has a frequency, and the field always aligns itself with the frequency that is strongest. When your awareness leads instead of your ego, you lift more than yourself. You lift the shared consciousness that every being participates in. In this moment, I want to invite you into a simple practice, one that may seem small, but carries the weight of the entire journey we've traveled together. Take a breath, not a forced breath, not a perfect breath, but a real one, the kind that feels like a returning. Let your shoulders ease a little. Place your hand over your heart, not as a ritual, but as a reminder that there is a living intelligence inside you that has survived every storm you've walked through. And as you breathe, let yourself feel the quiet truth that your breath is not yours alone. It is part of the field. It is part of the fabric that binds you to every person you love. Every inhalation steadies the connection. Every exhalation softens the tension that others may unconsciously carry. For a moment, simply recognize that the way you breathe affects the people who share your life. Your calm becomes their calm. Your peace becomes their permission. Your presence becomes their anchor. You have been influencing the field since the day you were born, whether you realized it or not. And now, with awareness, you can influence it with intention, with clarity, with love. As you sit here, as your hand rests gently on your chest, let yourself feel the truth of your own significance, not the egoic significance that seeks validation, but the quiet significance of a being who understands that they are woven into everything. You are not small. You are not irrelevant. You are not alone drifting through a meaningless universe. You are part of the field that holds all things together. And every moment you return to peace, you strengthen that field for everyone. You may think your healing is subtle, invisible, or too slow, but the field feels it. It responds. It shifts. And the more you come home to yourself, the more the world around you begins to settle, lighten, breathe. So let these words echo softly inside you. You are not as small as you once believed. Every time you return to your own peace, the whole world becomes a little more peaceful. Every time you choose presence over fear, you lift the field. Every time you hold your heart gently, you remind the collective how to heal. And every time you remember who you truly are, an expression of the same consciousness that moves through all beings, the field whispers back, "Welcome home."